Happy New Year, everyone. It's always a delight to start the year off celebrating Korean New Year. But of course, the last 2 years we've been reflecting on the year that has passed, and it has always been a huge challenge with the setbacks to democracy throughout Myanmar since the coup on the 1st of February 2022. We've heard, of course, that there are now around 2 million internally displaced people in Myanmar, and many, of course, from Karen State. We look back at the coup, and we all know the coup happened to prevent the elected government being sworn into Parliament for the first time since the democracy, where the army would maintain 25% of the seats in Parliament. The remaining 75% was so overwhelmingly dominated by people who the army couldn't control that their 25% couldn't actually work as a veto in the Parliament. And we know that that is why the coup happened. And after that happened, we saw massive protests, and we saw an enormous crackdown across the country. Many pro-democracy advocates killed and many people jailed, including, of course, elected members of the government, Aung San Suu Kyi, many others, as well as pro-democracy advocates, and even foreigners like Sean Tyrrell, who were there to work with the government of the day. It hasn't been to really anyone's benefit except the regime, the military. It has caused widespread economic devastation throughout the country, as other countries have been less willing to trade, as people have been displaced, people who would have been making a positive contribution to their families, to the economy, are now just struggling to feed their families, separated from their homes and what had been their jobs. And I'm really pleased that a year ago, on the anniversary, the Australian government put in place sanctions against many in the leadership of the military. Sanctions that would be quite effective in targeting just them rather than the people as a whole. It's something that we also need to keep monitoring, because there are, as we know, people who perhaps should have been captured by those sanctions that weren't. We do look forward to this year to things improving. Some of those people have been released from prison, people like Sean, who was here a few months ago, and I'm sorry I couldn't be with you on that day. I know it was a huge relief for his family and his friends, including my colleague in Parliament, Janelle Sappin, who has been a friend of his and a friend of this community and all the Burmese communities here in Australia for many, many years. We can hope that things will improve, but as we saw in John's presentation, the UN doesn't expect that to happen. In fact, they're budgeting for and planning for an expansion in the number of internally displaced people. I think it is really important to continue to highlight this, and certainly I'm hoping that in a few weeks, when Parliament returns, we can put something on in the Parliament to remind my colleagues in the New South Wales Parliament that there is still a crisis in Myanmar. There are still over 2 million internally displaced people. The military is still running the show and refusing to implement the decision of the Burmese people in the last democratic election, and that pressure needs to remain. Because in the last 2 years, we've also seen Russia's invasion of the Ukraine and the current war between Israel and Gaza. And as horrifying as the images are coming out of Gaza, and we've seen possibly close to 30,000 people killed in the last 3 months, we need to make sure that things that happened earlier, such as the coup, aren't forgotten. They're all really important, and if you're an advocate for human rights, you need to be an advocate for human rights everywhere. Doesn't mean if you're looking at the horror coming out of Gaza and if you're horrified by what Israel is doing, that in any way you accept what Hamas did to start with. Even in the context of 75 years of occupation, what Hamas did is a grotesque abuse of human rights, and what Israel has done in the 3 months since then is also a grotesque abuse of human rights on a scale not seen with such ferocity for a very long time. We can also, here in Australia, we have the benefit of being tied to all our neighbouring countries throughout Asia, and making sure we continue to place pressure through all those forums to not let the military be accepted back as in any way the legitimate leadership of one of our sovereign neighbouring countries. It's a difficult thing to do, but I think it is an important thing to do, and that we're in a very good position to be able to do that. It's also, I think, very special that we do events like this and showcase the traditions of the Korean community and the wonderful cultural traditions such as the bamboo dance that we just saw. A lot of people think that sometimes you should keep cultural celebrations and politics separate. But if politics is the reason why your community is actually come to Australia as refugees, and keeping your culture alive and making sure kids that grow up here in Australia still practice those traditional dances, learn language, keep in touch with friends, family and relatives, they can't help but be intertwined. And so it is important that we highlight human rights at the same time as celebrating Korean New Year and celebrating the traditions that go along with that. Traditions that haven't always been easy to enjoy and practice in Myanmar and Burma in recent decades. It's a reminder constantly that the regime that has been there pretty much for most of the time since World War II, has discriminated against the Karen and many other ethnic groups. And celebrating culture and keeping that alive is as much an important part of keeping the community together here as an act of defiance. And so it's very, very important. So I thank you again for inviting me to share such an important occasion with you all, and I wish you all the best for the coming year.